It was a cold July night. Shocking, I know. Although perhaps if you were from where I am, this won't be too much of a surprise. Our summer usually consisted of shockingly horrid weather that seemed to only bless us with the odd sunshine every other weekday. If we're lucky, of course. It was maybe midnight. I was downstairs and doing an Instagram live to pass the time. I'm probably the only person who actually uses that feature legitimately, or maybe I'm just weird. Anyway, I come off live around 1:11 a.m. and find that the wind outside is bellowing. I mean, it's absolutely shrieking out there, and it almost sounded like my window was going to shatter and collapse in on itself. I remember going upstairs, feeling the bitter air against my skin. It was almost as if winter had arrived early. I shut the window after I had my rewarding toilet break and went back downstairs to erase my complicated mind. I didn't have insomnia, yet I found it hard to sleep. My mind was so active at any given time, or it was always so busy with thoughts that it seemed unable to rest. It was a pain, but helped tremendously when I was doing productive activities or anything creative. Anyway, I check the time and I prepare myself for a long night, so I get on the phone, lay on my sofa, which is parallel to the window, and face the television. I couldn't even turn it on for fear of waking my family, so I sat and stared as I scrolled painfully through social media. Everyone's stories on Instagram or Snapchat, always being dry or pointless, shitposting. I felt myself growing tired. I started to feel my eyes getting heavier and heavier. They began to droop slightly. Until, and I wish I was saying this ironically, I found myself jolting upright again when I heard tapping on my window. Sure, it could have been the wind pushing the tent out back into the window, or maybe leaves or rain, but this wasn't random. This was continuous, calculated tap. It was a tap that you may do to alert someone when you're aware of their presence and perhaps want to alert them of your own. I wasn't one to feed into the imagination of one's mind, but this wasn't exactly a situation I wanted to make fun of either. It was as if I was living in a horror movie. I felt a contradicting moral conflict happening with me. Do I wake up my sleeping parents and potentially waste their sleeping hours on something that may have been my imagination? Or do I try and confront it, only to be greeted with what may be my final sight? I decided to go with the safer option, which was not to investigate at all. Anyone who watched anything horror-related knows that the dumbass who explores the situation always ends up being the first dead. Rule number 1 of being in a horror movie: do not investigate, or do not try to be the hero. That will get you killed too. Literally, I mean, if you think rationally. Rule of thumb: do not help a damsel in distress. Or better yet, just call the police. Though, even then, the police often aren't helpful. At least in the movies. At the very least, they are mediocre. Oh, to mention, I'm 16 living in a small town in Utah. We have our fair share of strange and wacky stories, but I wasn't one to feed into the bullshit of my small town. Unlike my dad, who seemed to jump at anything relating to anything weird. I spent a half an hour on my phone once I'd calmed myself down. I found myself staying awake until 3:35 a.m. It wasn't uncommon for me to be up this late. I actually found some kind of peace and quiet in staying up early hours until I noticed the sunrise. It was a comfort to me at this point, though I wouldn't suggest anyone take on this habit of mine, as it's very unhealthy and perhaps really detrimental to your mental health. I, for one, don't want to be responsible for anyone getting my kind of insomniac behavior. There was quiet. Besides the howling winds and sounds of coyote, or maybe wolves. Though in my area that was not uncommon for us to hear. If you stay up, that is. We lived close to the mountainous area, with a vast forest, and this seemed to stay that way, until the tapping began once again. The tapping was continuous, and again it seemed planned out. I don't want to be the one to jump at conclusions, but you can tell when something isn't natural. This was not natural. It was like a man, a woman, being was out there and trying to tantalize me. The tapping then escalated into thuds against the panes of glass, and then scratching, and it seemed to be accompanied by howling, or yipping. It was a high-pitched shriek, that was painful to hear, and I swear it could have made my ears bleed there. And then I started to panic, and finally, I broke. So I shouted as loud as I could, and finally my dad came downstairs with his gun. He seemed prepared for an intruder, and the fact that he responded with instant vigilance made me feel both safe and nervous at the same time. I couldn't help but find myself being cautious at what could have been happening, just based upon my dad's apprehensive reaction. Was he even asleep this whole time? Anyway, my dad gestured for me to turn off the lights, and he then told me to stay close to the floor and wait until he knocks the door twice to let him know he's back. And he opens the door and then goes out into the harsh, cold night. I felt myself tremble. Not because I was scared, though, that did feed into it too, but because my dad went into the unknown, and I have never seen him this frightened. At the end of the day, I knew he was a huge conspiracist, and perhaps he was thinking this was some monster, when in reality it was a small raccoon or something, though this time felt off. Everything just seemed so unreal. It wasn't long before I found myself counting to keep track of how long he was out there. I forgot to mention, but my dad said to lock the door, and thanks to his conspiracy beliefs, we had multiple locks on our front door. I believe 5 in total, including the one already included in the door. I locked them all, minus the actual lock on the door to make things easier for when he returns, and I waited. It was dark in the living room, and spending what felt like hours in there dragged by quickly. He usually would say in these situations to not ever go on your phone, as if you're trying to hide your screen brightness will catch you outright. Though I still had doubts I was in any real danger, with my dad and his gun around. So I checked my phone, and much to my horror, I found he had been gone for 2 hours. My mind couldn't comprehend the thought that I'd been sitting there for 2 hours in the dark, with my mom upstairs, and my dad still out somewhere in the night. My mind raced to potential conclusions, and honestly, I thought maybe this was the day he'd finally given up with my antics and chose to make his leave. But even in my rationalized thinking and conclusions, I found myself fumbling to try and call him, because if I know my dad, he always had his phone on him. He said that if he were to get lost, the government tracking him could just send a rescue. Hella bizarre, I know. It was maybe 2, 4, 10 times I called his phone to be sent to the same robotic tone of the voicemail.
They're not available to take your call right now. Just leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks.
Before I felt my tears swell up in my eyes and my body trembling yet again. My hormones making it even harder for me to contain my emotions that were heightened, and every little potential horror felt like the end of the world. I had already came up with a sick and twisted fate that took my father from me. A gruesome bear attack, or maybe a tree falling on him in his pursuit of whatever creature lurked around our house. But my panic and fear was soon put to rest when I heard 3 knocks on the door. It was a confident and continuous thud that echoed and seemed to shake the door when it made contact. Certainly sounded like my dad was proud with his hunting. I was ready to congratulate him, being the man of the house and all. And I began to unlock the locks of the door before my brain clicked. That was 3 knocks. Did he forget? My dad wasn't that stupid. Did he miscount? Surely not. I hesitated to unlock the final 2 locks, and then slowly backed away from the door and moved into the living room. I went to the window and slowly pulled apart the curtains to be greeted with something I had never seen before. Its face was covered by what seemed to be an animal skull. A wolf? Dog? No, coyote. He was bloodied and broken, and his body was covered in the same red splatters as I noticed he wasn't wearing anything but the skull and coyote skin. He was tall and muscular, I'd say 6 feet at least, and I was looking into the window. I didn't even move the curtains that much, but surely it must have knew I was there. I didn't look in its eyes, but I felt its glare staring me down, menacingly, as I knew that I was next. Whatever it was, this isn't my dad. So here the thing was. The creature in question fit the description of the witches Dad used to talk about. I can't remember what these things originated from, but a quick Google search would tell you it has deep roots in Native American lore. Now these witches, or we call skinwalkers, wasn't something I wanted to believe either. I didn't listen to a single word my dad used to tell me about these creatures, and I found that I was quickly trembling in fear of the unknown of what is to come. If this thing was far superior to me, being taller and visibly much stronger, why has it yet come to get me? The glass isn't indestructible, nor is my door entirely locked or bolted, so I'm sure it would have no trouble breaking and entering the house if it wanted to. Perhaps it didn't want to. Maybe I was thinking too much into the idea of all things monstrous will want to kill efficiently as possible. Some evils find pleasure in the thrill of the kill. And maybe that was the same for skinwalkers too. Anyways, my dad, wherever he was now, wasn't here to save me. Or my mother upstairs. So I suppose I felt some call to action and an inclination to take up my role as second in charge to try and defend my house and family. As any person might feel deep down, love for family is often something that'll make us do outrageous things. Anyways, I'm sidetracking a little. I pull away from the window and then back into the center of the living space, and I try to think of something to put in between me and the creature. All I knew is skinwalkers doesn't sound like the title of a creature that just eats you. I didn't find the idea of my flesh being torn apart with me being alive or dead appealing, and I hoped nobody would. I fumbled into the kitchen, tripping on the small step that we have separating the two areas, and I opened the drawers with such force it almost sounded like a large trolley being dragged across the mall. I pulled out the largest kitchen knife we owned, but then I saw my dad's favorite cooking utensil, a large cleaver. It didn't have reach, but it certainly was thick enough to cut an arm in one swoop, or if anything, just make a big enough plunge into something to make sure it was dead quickly. I found the courage to return to the living room and check the window only to find myself frozen. Yet again, the creature was gone? It could have been inside the house now. At any given point, I swear I was going insane. I felt myself starting to lose sight as the corners of my eyes began to get blurry and darken as the center of my vision began to hyperfixate in the form of tunnel vision. I found myself lunging upstairs to check on my mom, to find that in her room. There it stood, lurking over her. I freaked out, and with a scream I charged at the beast with great strides, bringing the cleaver over my head and then back down quick enough to ensure the most damage. I felt the blade stop and then sink into the flesh as it made contact with a satisfying sound. I just saved my mom. This grants me perhaps infinite fast food, or maybe a console game I always wanted. Yet my victory was cut short. The being I hit, the thing I killed, wasn't the skinwalker. As my vision cleared and my eyes adjusted in the dark, I saw that the blade had made a deep cut right into my mom's head. I remember letting go of the handle and feeling disgusted as the blade remained still. It was deep enough to have just plunged within her head, and I felt a twist and a knot form in my stomach as I had just come to terms with the fact I just killed my mom, whom I swore to protect not long before. I swear, it was an accident. Writing this now is both my confession and my plea for help. I don't know what to do. I'd slaughtered my own mother, but the story doesn't and didn't end there. As I still hadn't gotten rid of the skinwalker issue, I heard it again. The tapping, the thuds, the scratching, the coyote shrieks, they were all happening again, all at once. At every window in the house, and the front door was being pounded, and this time it was frantic. And beneath the hectic sounds, I heard what sounded like my dad.
Noah! Noah! Open the fucking door! Noah!
He pleaded for me to come help him. I was so happy to hear his voice. I felt myself succumbing to tears and crying, yet still finding the courage and strength to run downstairs. and through my glassy eyes, unlock every lock of the door. I twisted the handle, pulled the door, and then saw the front yard. It was empty. Nothing in sight. Not even my dad. Hell, even a rodent would have been a sight for sore eyes. I would have found comfort in maybe seeing some spider or horrible slug in the pathway, but it was completely empty. I felt a dark presence take a hold of me, and I felt an urge to go out into the dark. It wasn't cold anymore. I had completely forgotten it was such a thing. In fact, I remember finding myself being completely lost in whatever trance state I was in. I couldn't even remember how bitter it felt when my dad first left to fend the house. I took one step out, and as my foot hit the solid concrete of the front step, I felt a tug as something ran beside me and tried to take my leg with it. I remember flailing and grabbing onto the door frame in a pity attempt at keeping myself bound. I remember kicking and screaming, hoping my neighbors would hear or see the commotion. I felt the panic and terror rush over me as I felt my fingers slip, and now began to be dragged from outside the front of my house into the thick and dense forest behind it. I remember first being dragged before it picked me up and began to run quickly. It was dangerously fast. If anyone encounters them, do not run. Don't even try it. Your best option or chance of survival is to fight. And if you cannot see who is speaking, do not believe a single word spoken. They can sound like anyone. I'm writing this from some weird cave hidden within the forest. More like a den, I suppose. I'm using my phone to post this online in hopes some of my friends see it and don't believe it's bullshit. I've used the last of my data to post all of my stories, and I hope they don't skip through them as I do theirs. Because I am not shitposting. I need help. I am in trouble. I see him. My dad, I mean. They have him laying down, and he seems to be unconscious. They are beginning to remove his skin now. If you see this, I don't know if I ever made it out alive. My name is Noah Wakefield. I'm 16 years old, from Utah, and I am not a murderer.